Canada has given the world some truly great things. The telephone, poutine, one of the coolest YouTube channels, just to name a few, and also the Dodge Challenger Hellcat Demon. That's right, some of the most iconic American muscle cars are actually Canadian. But Canada itself doesn't have its own major car brand. What's up with that? It's a bit weird to me that a nation that's so clearly capable of producing a vehicle for the mass market has no mass market vehicle of its own. So why exactly doesn't Canada make their own cars? We're gonna take a look at why that is and how a secret deal may have sealed the fate of the Canadian car's extinction.
Welcome to the Great White North, eh?
Thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring this episode of Wheelhouse. You know, Jeremiah's always talking about how his Raycon Everyday E25 earbuds help him drift away from the stresses of daily life, so I figured I'd see what all the fuss is about. Ah! What? Key Ticklin' Tony?
Afternoon, Nolan.
Where am I?
You're in a Raycon spot, Nolan. So why don't you sit down and rest those weary bones and let the music guide you on a spiritual journey.
How long can I stay here?
Well, Raycon's Everyday E25 earbud gives you 6 hours of playtime. And while they're exquisitely comfortable, they sound just as good as those other premium earbuds at half the price.
How does it end?
All you have to say is head on over to buyraycon.com/donut or click the link in the description to get 15% off your order. And hey, Nolan, guess what?
What's that, Key Ticklin' Tony?
It was me all along, Nolan, Uncle Jerry. Listen, I don't tickle keys, but I do tickle legs. Give me those legs. Ah!
That was weird. Canadian car brands came into fruition in what's known as the brass era of the late teens and early 1920s, when cars and trucks had all the hinges, handles, and headlamps finished in brass trim. Canada had managed to cultivate 11 major automotive manufacturing marks, including Brooks, Grey Dort, McLaughlin, Chatham, Redpath, and several others. That's right, Redpath, as in Zach Redpath. He's sitting right there off camera. Canadian auto companies were primarily based out of Ontario due to its close proximity to Detroit, home of Ford, Chrysler, and GM, aka the Big Three. By 1923, Canada was the second largest automaker in the world. However, the industry as a whole struggled with inefficiency. Canada also had high tariffs on all trades to the US. When the Great Depression hit, it crippled the independent auto industry. By 1931, 75% of all Canadian car companies went belly up. Can I get an F in chat? This was the first nail in the coffin for Canada's native car industry. But the Big Three stayed in Canada because they were already using Canadian factories to build American models. This also gave them access to British nations as well because Canada was part of the British Empire. This relationship remained largely unchanged for the next several decades, with American cars being produced in Canada and mostly being shipped back to the US for sale. Because of the lack of car sales in Canada, this caused a large deficit with the US, like $785 million. Basically, Canada was paying more money to send cars to the US than they were making by selling cars made in Canada to Canadians. But more money was only part of why Canada was having more problems. In 1964, Canada and the US got together to address the money issues that had developed. What resulted was something called the Automotive Products Trade Agreement of 1964, better known as the Auto Pact. Before the Auto Pact, post-World War II prosperity had jump-started car sales all over North America, but Canadian manufacturing plants couldn't keep up with demand. This resulted in less business between the US and Canada, which was bad for Canadian makers and dealers. Solving this problem was the founding idea of the Auto Pact. The officially stated goals of Auto Pact were to cut production costs, reduce prices on cars for Canadians, reduce the trade deficit, and create a broader automotive market. This pact specifically said that there would be a minimum production to sales ratio of 1:1, meaning that for every vehicle sold in Canada, a vehicle must be produced in Canada. Since there were basically only big American car brands that still existed in Canada when the Auto Pact was created, the cars getting produced for the American market and the cars being sold to the Canadian market were basically all US models. But the ones sold to Canadians were modified for the Canadian market, resulting in some interesting Canada-spec'd models based on American cars. Canada. You say it one too many times and it starts to lose its meaning. Canada got rides like the Acadian Conso. Acadian was a Canadian sub-brand of GM and got sold through Pontiac dealers, and it was kind of a beast. Using the chassis from the Chevy 2 platform and styling cues from Pontiac, the Acadian Conso was a bit of a parts bin special, but it worked. It kind of looks like a lightweight GTO. The top trim level came with a 396 cubic inch V8 and a 4-on-the-floor transmission. Sounds awesome. And in 2012, one of these things sold at auction for $73,700. Not bad for a cut and shut car. Chrysler did the same sort of thing with their Dodge trucks. To get their workhorses to the Canadian market, a sub-brand called Fargo came into play.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Ford followed suit with their F-Series line of trucks, rebranding the vehicle as a Mercury, and Ford sold Mercury-badged F-Series trucks to Canadians, simply replacing the F with an M and calling it a day. Ford did this again with their Falcon-derived Frontenac. I'm just gonna say it, which was basically a Ford Falcon with a boatload of maple leaves plastered all over it and an all-new grille. Heck, even the hubcaps had maple leaves pressed straight into them. It's awesome. In the first 6 years of the Auto Pact, Canada eliminated the entire deficit with the US auto industry. The pact was proving its worth and helping to create a more robust and lively automotive market in Canada. It actually worked. Nice. Between 1966 and 1977, the money-centric relationship between Canada and the US ping-ponged its favor back and forth and eventually grew to a US surplus of just over $1 billion. This also perpetuated the auto industry to become the #1 export industry in all of Canada, employing over 100,000 people across the country. This ingrained the big three into the automotive industry in Canada. This didn't have any direct benefits for creating a high-volume Canadian car brand, but the benefits helped so many other aspects of Canadian life, like the workforce, technology advancements, and a booming economy. But in many ways, this was yet another nail in the Canadian automaker coffin. However, other nations took notice of the Auto Pact and started their own relationships with the Canadian workforce. Foreign manufacturers, glomming on to the booming Canadian automotive manufacturing industry, wanted to get in on that sweet Tim Hortons Wayne Gretzky coffee, which, if you didn't know, is a coffee with 9 sugars and 9 creamers, because Gretzky's number is 99. It's also known as a cup of pure energy. We should harness it to power our grid. Through the 70s, Honda, Isuzu, and Toyota gained presence in Canada. They weren't part of the Auto Pact, but this didn't stop these Japanese companies from taking up more than 16% of the market in Canada and the United States, all on their own by the mid-80s. Canada made a separate agreement with these Japanese companies in the form of something called a duty remission incentive, which essentially removes any taxes on products that were imported into the country. The side effect of this was very interesting and kind of weird. Because Japanese automotive manufacturers set up shop in Canada, Canada was able to tie them into the duty-free exports to the United States, so long as those Japanese cars were Canada-made. Pretty clever. Because Canada wasn't technically violating any of the stipulations of the Auto Pact, it was allowed to continue with their middleman status and keep a steady flow of foreign cars built in the Great White North and then sold to the US. With looming renegotiations, the US had 2 objectives on their mind. One, eliminating duty remissions into Canada and adopting free trade between nations. Prior to these upcoming negotiations, the pact was great for the Canadian workforce and economy, but it was driving nail after nail into the independent Canadian auto industry, which had pretty much become non-existent in terms of market share. In 1989, the free trade agreement came into effect, which got rid of any tax costs between Canada and the US for all cars and car parts, while still maintaining that 1-to-1 production to sales ratio. But because of the now frictionless movement of product between 2 nations,
frictionless,
it largely benefited US-based companies because of them being so much larger and having better technology than essentially any company that had a presence in the entire continent. This new free trade agreement later got incorporated into NAFTA, which overruled any preferential treatment that the Auto Pact had put in place. The Auto Pact was canceled in 2001, but it didn't matter because trade minimums were already well above the 1-to-1 minimum. US and Japanese companies had effectively swallowed up the entire independent Canadian automotive market, and Canada had become the go-to manufacturer for a large portion of the Big Three's catalogs, as well as for Honda and Toyota. But that's not to say there wasn't any hope for Canada to make a mainstream product in the car world, though. Even though Canada largely caters to the big boys in the automotive realm, there are still some smaller and very unique and I think pretty cool Canadian car companies. Prevost is a Canadian tour bus and motorhome company, and the machines they make are impressive to say the least. They're literally some of the largest vehicles allowed on the road. There's the H345 VIP, which is 45 feet long with 500 horsepower, making 1750 foot-pounds of torque. That's a big boy. Another cool Canadian car company is the Campania Corporation and their T-Rex three-wheeled car. I remember seeing this thing on like Ride with Funkmaster Flex back in the day. Their track-ready model called the RR is powered by a straight 4 Kawasaki motor making 200 horsepower and a 6-speed sequential gearbox, and the thing only weighs 998 pounds. This thing's a beast. Another crazy car brand out of Canada is called Conquest Vehicles, and they make something called the Knight XV, or Knight 15. I'm gonna say XV because it sounds more intimidating. It's an insane, bulletproof, uber luxurious SUV that's built to customer spec off of the Ford F550 platform. Just look at this thing. The Ford Excursion is Bruce Banner, the Knight XV is the Hulk. My personal favorite car that's currently being produced in Canada is made by a supercar company called Felino. Their CB7 and CB7R supercars are powered by a 6.2-liter LS V8. Nice. The CB7R is the race spec variant, and it can produce 700 horsepower. The company was started by Canadian race champion Antoine Bessette in 2010, and they've been building bespoke track day machines for clients since 2017. This thing looks awesome. It looks like something out of science fiction. But don't forget though, we also have the Canadians to thank for some of our favorite cars. Literally every single Dodge Challenger and Charger is produced in Ontario. Think about that. The Dodge Demon, an 840 horsepower, all-American drag strip monster, is Canadian. With that considered, I really wish it came with a flannel seat option. Canada also makes the Toyota Corolla and the Honda Civic, as well as the Toyota RAV4. We can also thank the amazing Canadian designers and engineers that built the all-new Ford GT. This is like America's mascot. It's Ford distilled into a supercar, and it's Canadian. Ultimately, Canada forsake its own independent automotive industry for the ability to provide a more robust and fruitful workforce for the people that live and work in Canada. And in a way, that's the most Canadian thing I've ever heard of. What's your favorite thing from Canada? Jim Carrey's Canadian, Avril Lavigne is Canadian, JB, yeah, who could forget? The Biebs, Canadian. I'm actually a quarter Canadian. My grandmother was from Edmonton, Alberta, go Oilers, so I can say Canuck. Be kind. See you next time. Love you, Canada.